Hi, this is Hart Hagen in Louisville, Kentucky, and I want to talk with you about what the United Nations has to say about water and the climate crisis. First, before I forget it, I have my handy dandy notepad, and I want to ask you to do a few things. One thing is like and subscribe. That helps with the algorithm. I'm speaking on March 3rd, 2024. If you like and subscribe, I can go from currently 950 subscribers up to 1,000. And I hope you can help me with that. And also, I want you to know that harthagen.substack.com is where you can get a lot of my written material. And I've written like over 20,000 words in the last 3 or 4 months. Some of my articles are 5,000 words or more, which is way too long, but I think you'll find them upbeat. They're divided up into a lot of headings so you can easily scan. And in those articles, I'm addressing a lot of the same issues that I'm talking about today. So before I get started, I want to say something good about the United Nations, because I'm going to be saying a lot of critical things about the United Nations. But one thing I have good to say about the United Nations is that the United Nations Charter is one of the most widely adopted treaties in history, and it has good things in it. If we were to adhere to the provisions of the United Nations Charter, then it would be a different world. For one thing, it says no member nation shall use force or the threat of force against the territorial sovereignty or the political independence of any other state. Well, I'm in the United States. The United States does that 1,000 times every day before breakfast. We are constantly interfering with the territorial sovereignty and the political independence of other states. And we do so with force and the threat of force. So it's not that the United Nations is bad in theory. It's good in theory, but in practice, it is owned by the people. It's owned by governments, and it's owned by the corporations that own the governments. It's owned by the wealthy elite class that owns the governments. So having said that, let's just look at the United Nations for what it is. I mean, there are good people in it, and there are good institutions within the United Nations, but always understand that it is owned by the people who own the world. And that's the way some people want it, but they don't want you or me to know about that particular fact. Now, let me go over here. So you see on the screen, welcome to the United Nations. What I'm talking about here is I looked up drought and the United Nations, and it took me to this. I looked up drought and climate change, and it took me to this place where it says, welcome to the United Nations. Water is at the center of the climate crisis. So I thought, wow, that's good. That's good that they're saying water is at the center of the climate crisis. But then it's not really what I would like for them to say about it or think about it. I would like for them to take the position that humans are part of nature. Water is a vital part of nature. So water is at the center of what nature does, but they're not really saying that. But let's see what they do say. It says, climate change is exacerbating. Let me get it centered here. Climate change is exacerbating both water scarcity and water-related hazards such as flood and droughts, as rising temperatures disrupt precipitation patterns and the entire water cycle. They almost had it right. When they say water is at the center of the climate crisis, they almost had the right idea, but then they missed it by a country mile. So it says climate change is exacerbating both water scarcity and water-related hazards. So what the word climate change there, we are to understand to mean warming caused by greenhouse gases which are in turn caused by fossil fuels. We're supposed to have a certain understanding of the cause and effect relationship here. We're supposed to think, okay, in the last 150 years, humans have used fossil fuels prodigiously, which we have, and those fossil fuels have generated carbon dioxide, which it has, and that carbon dioxide causes warming, which it does, and that warming, and not much else, causes all of the floods and the droughts and the water scarcity. But it's the last point where they're missing the boat. But okay, so it says climate change is exacerbating both water scarcity and water-related hazards. We're going to talk about what water scarcity is really about. And we're going to talk about water-related hazards such as flood and drought, and talk about what those things are really about. Where does flooding really come from? I mean, really. And flooding doesn't come from carbon dioxide. Flooding doesn't come from a warmer atmosphere, or if it does, the warmer atmosphere is only a small part of flooding. And if that's true, why don't they shoot straight with you? Why don't they tell you that, okay, we have floods, and floods are caused in part by a warmer atmosphere, but in part by other things. They don't do much of that nuance. Climate change is exacerbating both water scarcity and water-related hazards such as floods and droughts. They want you to think that climate change causes droughts. When they say climate change, they're talking about generalized warming caused by fossil fuels. And they want you to think that that causes droughts. You know, it has some logic to it. But the logic that it has to it is that you would think that if greenhouse gases cause a warmer atmosphere, and the warmer atmosphere, you would think, would cause some amount of drying of the land. But let's get more into it. It's not that simple, and we're being led down a garden path with this. Now, let me say something. This is a quote that is used frequently by my friend Derek Jensen, who you can see. If you look at my YouTube channel, you can see Derek Jensen. I have 3 interviews with Derek Jensen. Love the man. He frequently quotes Henry Adams. So Henry Adams, semi-famous American. He had very famous great-grandparents. So Henry Adams, the great-grandson of John Adams, second president of the United States, grandson of John Quincy Adams, who was like the 5th or 6th president of the United States, 1824 to 1828. And he was the son of another Adams, maybe Charles Francis Adams, who was the ambassador to the United Kingdom under the Abraham Lincoln administration. Henry Adams was a famous historian who wrote a 7 or 9 volume history of the Jefferson and Madison administrations. It was acclaimed for its literary style and its command of the documentary evidence. So Henry Adams, not a lightweight. He was a child of the establishment. And he lived from about 1838 to 1918, died at the age of 80 in 1918. Henry Adams said the following. He said, "The press is the hired agent of a moneyed system and set up for no other purpose than to tell lies where their interests are involved. One can trust nobody and nothing." I think that's true. I think the press is the hired agent of a moneyed system and set up for no other purpose than to tell lies where their interests are involved. Now, I have said some good things about the United Nations, and there are good people in the United Nations. But the United Nations is part of the press. I mean, do they not own a printing press, metaphorically speaking? Do they not have a major platform? Do they not put out a lot of information? The United Nations is the press. The press is not just cable news and the national newspapers and local newspapers. The press is anybody who puts out a lot of information, and the people who put out a lot of information are set up for no other purpose than to tell lies on behalf of a moneyed class. So if we accept that premise, then the United Nations, you have to look at who owns them, and you have to understand that their rhetoric exists for the purpose of telling lies on behalf of moneyed interests. So let's get into this, and we're going to apply that understanding to what the United Nations has to say about flooding, drought, precipitation, water cycles, soil. Okay. So, water and climate change are inextricably linked. Climate change affects the world's water in complex ways. So when it says water and climate change are inextricably linked, I'm saying yes, because what they're going to say is that much of climate change is caused by broken water cycles, but they don't say that. They're saying climate change is caused by carbon dioxide, which is caused by the burning of fossil fuels, all of which results in generalized global warming, which causes flood and drought. A tired, misleading story. So water and climate change are inextricably linked. Climate change affects the world's water in complex ways. Well, when they say climate change, like what's the cause and effect? What comes first? What comes next? What comes next? Climate change, which is understood to be warming of the atmosphere, affects the world's water. So they're saying you have warming of the atmosphere, and then you have impact on the water cycles. I think impact on the water cycles comes first. Well, there's what we do to the water cycles, and then there's the water cycles being impacted and adversely affected, and then that causes climate change. Very different story. From unpredictable rainfall patterns to shrinking ice sheets, rising sea levels, floods, and droughts, most impacts of climate change come down to water. So, a lot to unpack there. Let's unpack each one. Let's go to unpredictable rainfall patterns, shrinking ice sheets, say that 3 times fast. Shrinking ice sheets. No, that's not too tough. Rising sea levels, floods, and droughts. So first, unpredictable rainfall patterns. Unpredictable rainfall patterns are broken water cycles. So did we break the water cycles first and then experience climate change from that, which is what I think happened, or did we put a bunch of carbon dioxide? That's something that sounds like a kid's song. A bunch of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and then generalized warming resulting in broken water cycles. So I think you have to look no further than deforestation to understand that if you understand what forests do for us, then say, okay, here's a forest. It's doing all these things for us. And then you remove the forest. And now the forest is no longer doing these things for us because it's not there to do it. So forests have well, I'm going to name about, I don't know, 7 or 8 things that forests do. They evaporate a lot of water, contributing to the next water cycle. They cause condensation because they not only evaporate the water, but they put out these condensation nuclei, which are necessary for condensation. With all that condensation, there is cloud formation. Without clouds, you can't have rain. So evaporation, condensation, cloud formation. The next thing they do is precipitation. Now, the forest does not make precipitation happen, but the forest allows precipitation to happen by creating a cool, moist environment. If you don't have a cool, moist environment, if you have a hot, dry environment, then it's harder for a raindrop to make it all the way to the ground. But if you have a cool, moist environment, then maybe, just maybe, that raindrop can make it all the way to the ground. I've just named 4 things that forests do for water cycles. Haven't even gotten to the rest of it. Okay, what else do forests do for water cycles? They create a sponge. The leaves of the tree are a sponge. A tree can have upwards of 200,000 leaves. 200,000 leaves on a full-grown tree. So therefore, that tree intercepts rainfall as it's headed toward the ground, and the leaves on the tree are a sponge. And then in the fall, the leaves fall off the tree. The leaves form a layer of leaf litter on the ground. And this layer of leaf litter is an absorbent. It soaks up the rainfall. So the leaves on the tree soak up the rainfall. The leaves on the ground soak up the rainfall. Furthermore, trees have roots. And roots get into the ground, and roots make the soil what it is. The roots of a tree, or at least the roots of any plant, are the main thing that makes soil healthy. So all the things that is, so that's the forest being a sponge. The forest, I shouldn't go too much further into that. We could talk about the forest being a cooler because of all the evaporation. The forest makes it cool, et cetera, et cetera. But where I'm coming from, and there's a really good book on this. There's many good books on this, but I want to refer you to Climate, a New Story by Charles Eisenstein, in which he makes the point that should be obvious, and that is climate is not all about temperature. Climate must incorporate rainfall. You need to look at differences in rainfall and precipitation if you're going to contemplate, if you're going to even think clearly about climate. So, all of which is to say that when they say from unpredictable rainfall patterns to shrinking ice sheets, rising sea levels, floods and droughts, most impacts of climate change come down to water. And they're so close to being true. It's like they almost said something that was true and accurate there. On its face, it's true and accurate, but when you get down into the details, they're looking at an entirely different story from my understanding. And I'm thinking, my understanding is not just me. A lot of good people see it this way, but you're dealing with competing narratives here. There's one narrative, that the carbon dioxide narrative, is just all over the news. Everybody who knows anything about climate change, at least the prevailing narrative about climate change, knows that it's all caused by carbon dioxide. So let's unpack some more of this. From unpredictable rainfall patterns to shrinking ice sheets. Okay, shrinking ice sheets, what they're talking about is generalized global warming, not local or regional warming, but generalized global warming. The climate narrative is about generalized global warming, which causes shrinking ice sheets from Greenland to the Arctic to the Antarctic to even the Himalayas or the Himalayas. The tops of every major mountain range has ice sheets. Those ice sheets are melting because of generalized global warming. Generalized global warming is true. Generalized global warming is a real thing. I just don't think the cause of generalized global warming is strictly greenhouse gases. I think generalized global warming is caused by, yes, partly by greenhouse gases, but that's not the whole story. And if people tell you that's the whole story, I just think that they're lying. Willfully or not, they're lying. But what else causes generalized global warming? Hot plates. Pavement is a hot plate. Pavement is a solar-powered hot plate. Concrete is a solar-powered hot plate. The sand of deserts is a solar-powered hot plate. Deserts didn't used to be deserts. They used to be grasslands. Most of our deserts are from most of our deserts used to be either grasslands or forests. If you've seen those pictures, have you seen those pictures of a mountain, and like that mountain is completely bare? There's nothing on that mountain. That mountain is rock. Well, maybe 500 years ago that mountain was rock, or maybe that mountain had trees on it and the trees were cut down for purposes of timber and for mining. Back before fossil fuels, they needed timber. They burned timber for wood. They needed it for fuel. Humans make fire. It's what we do. And before we had fossil fuels to burn, we burned timber, and so deserts are not. Most deserts are not natural. Most deserts used to be a forest, or they used to be grasslands. So if it's a desert that is where the sun shines on sand or rock, that is a solar-powered hot plate. We could turn that around, but we have to know that it's a problem to begin with. One of the main ways we can turn our deserts around is to strategically graze livestock on deserts. It's like, Hart, how do you graze the livestock if there's no grass there? Well, you bring the hay and you graze them. And that's a whole big thing. And it's not going to happen if we believe this, what I consider to be a false narrative of we need to move to a plant-based diet. That's another conversation. We can talk about that, but it's not whether we eat plants or we eat the meat of animals. It's whether those plants were raised holistically and regeneratively. It's whether the animals were raised holistically or regeneratively or not. Whether you're raising plants or animals, we can do it holistically and regeneratively, or we can do what we've been doing. The way we do agriculture, we make deserts. We are a desert-making species. Forests precede us and deserts dog our heels. We make deserts. We make deserts with fire, and we make deserts with the way we do agriculture. And, livestock can either be done right or it can be done wrong. And so how did I get off on this? We were talking about shrinking ice sheets. Shrinking ice sheets are caused by generalized global warming, but carbon dioxide is not the only thing that causes generalized global warming. Generalized global warming is caused by, okay, don't you hate it when you lose your train of thought? Generalized global warming is, yes, some of it is caused by greenhouse gases. Some of it is caused by hot plates in the form of pavement, concrete, desert, and rock, or desert sand. So we need to restore those. We need to see where our hot plates are, and we need to cover them with plant matter. We need to cover them with trees. We need to cover them with grasses, whatever is ecologically appropriate in that location. But none of this is being talked about by the United Nations or the New York Times or cable news or any of the places that are trying to teach us what's really going on with climate change. From unpredictable rainfall patterns to shrinking ice sheets, rising sea levels. Okay, rising sea levels, what's that about? They want you to think that rising sea levels are all about shrinking ice sheets, ice melts, and that the ice that was up here on land then flows into the sea. And, some of that, of course, that is occurring. Whether that is responsible, whether that's the sole cause or the primary cause of rising sea levels is a whole other conversation. Here's what they're missing in that conversation, and that is there's a net loss of fresh water every year. I think further down in this article, the United Nations says that only 0.5%, only a half of a percent of water is fresh water. Well, that number, it continues to go down because every year there's an exchange of salt water to fresh water and back to salt water every year. So salt water evaporates, it becomes rain. Rain is fresh water. That rain flows off into the streams and rivers and into the ocean. So there's many cubic kilometers, thousands of cubic kilometers of water that goes from salt water to fresh water every year. And presumably there's an exactly equal amount that goes from fresh water back into salt water, but it's not an exactly equal amount. We're losing fresh water. We're losing fresh water every year. And it happens primarily because we don't harvest our rainwater. We can harvest our rainwater by having more plants and less bare ground. That's the main thing right there. We can harvest our rainwater by improving the quality of our soil so that our soil holds water. From unpredictable rainfall patterns to shrinking ice sheets, rising sea levels, floods and droughts. Okay, I'm going to talk a lot about floods and droughts below, but the main thing we need to know about flooding is not primarily caused by rainfall. Flooding is caused by runoff. If you get rainfall, but it soaks into the ground and you don't have runoff, then you're not going to have a flood. They almost never say this, whether it's in the news coverage, whether it's the United Nations analysis of how these things work. They're almost never going to tell you that floods are caused by runoff. Floods are not caused by rainfall. Yes, with climate change, we are getting more occasional downpours. We get more rain less frequently. So yes, that's a problem, but the flooding is not caused by the rainfall. I mean, I tell the story about Gabe Brown, North Dakota farmer. In 2009, he got over a foot of rain in less than a day. Over a foot of rain in less than 24 hours, no flooding, because he had been taking care of his soil. He has high infiltration rates. Infiltration is the opposite of runoff. Infiltration means the water is sinking into the soil. It's not running off. Gabe's neighbors and farms all across the country, they have flooding because their soil is crap. And their soil is crap because the way we treat soils, the way soil is treated in mainstream agriculture. So flooding happens because the rain is not sinking into the ground. And drought occurs because the rain is not sinking into the ground. Drought is only partly caused by a lack of precipitation. Drought can also be defined as you got precipitation, or a drought can also be defined as a drying out of the soils. If you get below average rainfall, but your soil is still moist because you have good soil, then you're not gonna, in a sense, you're not having drought. We can't complain about drought if we don't capture the rain that does fall. We need to capture the rain that does fall. So let's move on. Climate change is exacerbating both water scarcity and water-related hazards such as floods and droughts. Okay, water scarcity. When they're talking about water scarcity, they're talking about a scarcity of water for people. And people need water for drinking and personal use, such as bathing, washing clothes and stuff like that. And they need it for livestock, and they need it for crops. So water scarcity. So why do we have water scarcity? Because we have not been capturing the rain that does fall, because our soil is crap. Whether it's North America, whether it's Africa, whether it's any place else, if we've been abusing the soil, we haven't been practicing the 5 principles of soil health, which you can read about in Gabe Brown's book, Dirt to Soil. So if we were treating our soils right, then we would capture most of the rain that does fall. If we were allowing our forests to exist without cutting them down, then we would be capturing most of the rain that does fall. It's kind of simple, but they don't want you to think clearly about this stuff. They don't want you to think clearly. And when I say they, I'm not talking about the good people at the United Nations. I'm talking about their owners. The people who own this world do not want average people to be able to think clearly about what they are doing. They want us to be completely sold on this false and misleading narrative about what climate change is really about. They want us to think that it's all about CO2. They don't want us to think that it's about deforestation or industrial agriculture or abuse of our soils. So I'm trying to decide whether to end now or go. Let me go just a little bit longer. Read what they have to say about it here. About 2 billion people worldwide don't have access to safe drinking water today. And roughly half of the world's population is experiencing severe water scarcity for at least part of the year. Okay, so what do we do about that? Well, we make war. We make war so as to enrich and empower the people who own the world and the people who run the major empires of the world. First and foremost, the empire that is the United States. If we don't understand that, if we don't think clearly about that, then we're not going to understand very much else about what goes on. We don't have a technocratic problem here. We have a politico-economic problem here. We have a problem with our understanding of how the world works. Next issue. Only about 0.5% of water on Earth is usable and available fresh water. Okay, let's deal with that. And the way to deal with that is not to somehow lower carbon dioxide. We need to lower carbon dioxide, but the people who are crying and whining and griping the most about carbon dioxide do not have a plan for dealing with it. That's a whole other conversation. But if we wanted to have more fresh water, we would have more plant matter, and we would practice the 5 principles of soil health, which you can read about in Gabe Brown's Dirt to Soil. And climate change is dangerously affecting that supply. Over the past 20 years, terrestrial water storage, including soil moisture, snow, and ice, has dropped at a rate of 1 centimeter per year, with major ramifications for water security. Right, fine. So what are you going to do about it? Well, we're going to lower the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, except we're not really, because we don't care about that, because we, the people who own the world, don't care. The people who own the world don't want to solve these problems. They just want to, you wouldn't get to the top unless you had, you don't get to the top by caring about the world. You get to the top by caring about power and control. Water supplies stored in glaciers and snow cover are projected to further decline over the course of the century, thus reducing water availability during warm and dry periods in regions supplied by melt. from water from major mountain ranges where more than 1/6 of the world population currently live. Okay. What's causing glaciers to melt? Partly is carbon dioxide, but it's because the atmosphere is warm. The atmosphere is warm for multiple reasons. The atmosphere is warm partly because of the hot plates of the world, but melting glaciers are a problem because there is less of a steady supply of water. If you know the snow melt supplies water for the streams. When you have a warming atmosphere, the snow melt occurs and you have more flooding and less of a steady flow of streams during the spring and summer. So, in order to deal with that, it's a whole other conversation, but it gets back to rainwater harvesting. We need to harvest rainwater. The American West is a freaking mess when it comes to rainwater harvesting. We have all of the wrong rule. That there is no rhyme or reason. The American West is absolutely sabotaging the water supplies of the West because we go about it all the wrong way. We need to be harvesting rainwater everywhere. We have these counterproductive rules that say, you're not allowed to put up a rock dam on your property because that means that water can't flow into Lake Mead. Well, if you had a rock dam on your property and if you were able to raise the water table on your own property, then there would be more plant growth. You have more plant growth, you have more water stored. You have more water stored, then you have this recycling of moisture, and then you have more rainfall, or even if you don't have more rainfall, you have the plants and the soil holding more water that gently gets released into the streams. And then Lake Mead would have all the water it needed. But no, we're not going to do it that way. We're not even going to think that's possible. So, enough for one day. Let me leave you with some resources. Don't forget to click like and subscribe. Please help me get up to 1,000 subscribers from the 950 where I currently am. And don't forget to go to harthagen.substack.com for my blog. But here's some resources that are not all about Hart Hagen. I want you to, I'm going to load you down with more than you can handle. But if you picked only one of these resources, I got some books here. I got some YouTube videos. Look the following up on either YouTube or book. Judith Schwartz, Water in Plain Sight. Excellent book. She wrote 3 books. I could recommend any of them, but since we're talking about water, let's go with Water in Plain Sight. Gabe Brown, Dirt to Soil. If you want to know about the 5 principles of soil health, then get Gabe Brown's book, Dirt to Soil. Also look up Gabe Brown on YouTube. There's one particular video that's I recommend the most. It's called Treating the Farm as an Ecosystem, or How to Treat the Farm as an Ecosystem. And okay, YouTube, I want you to look up Vandana Shiva on YouTube, or look up any of the 10 books she's written, Vandana Shiva. As far as American farmers who are doing things right and therefore treating their soil right, look up Will Harris of White Oak Pastures. Look up Mark Shepard. One of his main books is Restoration Agriculture. Another one of his books that I like is Water for Any Farm. Very good. Also look up Joel Salatin on YouTube, Salatin. Joel has written a lot of books and a lot of good material on YouTube. Joel Salatin in Virginia, Will Harris in Georgia, Mark Shepard in Wisconsin. I'm sure I'm leaving out some big names there, but that's what comes to mind. Also, consider looking up Rainwater Harvesting, Volume 1 and 2 by Brad Lancaster. And also, Andrew Millison is among the best teachers. Andrew Millison of Oregon State University just has great YouTube videos about water. He's a really good teacher. He does really good videos. So that's about all. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you will have a wonderful day.